Friday potluck now from a new proposed Fed chair to a possible government shutdown. Our Washington, D.C. bureau has the latest. Here's Josiah Pike.
President Trump announced on social media earlier today he would nominate Kevin Warsh to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Joining us to talk about it is our White House correspondent, John Decker. John, why did the president choose Warsh, and what's he expecting now from the Fed?
Well, the president indicated both in a social media post and also a little bit later in the Oval Office that he believes Kevin Warsh, who is 55 years old, formerly served on the Federal Reserve, is the best person available for the job. He would succeed Jerome Powell as the Fed chair. Powell's term ends in May. He still needs to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Now, as it relates to what the president is expecting, he's expecting Kevin Warsh to lead the way, to pave the way for the Fed to continue lowering interest rates over the course of 2026. That being said, just 2 days ago, the Fed voted 10-2 to pause interest rate cuts. That upset the president. I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why the president announced Jerome Powell's successor just a few days later.
I know the Senate's working to hammer out a deal that would avoid a potential government shutdown. What's in this deal, and what happens next?
Well, this deal would fund all funding for 5 federal departments through the end of this fiscal year, through September the 30th. But as it relates for funding for the Department of Homeland Security, that would only last for the next 2 weeks. It will be a continuing resolution, allowing lawmakers to come up with a compromise to address those concerns by Senate Democrats. They would like to see changes in the tactics that DHS agents employ in many cities across the country. So once it passes the Senate, which will likely be later today, later tonight, it still needs to be passed by the House of Representatives. The House Speaker said that would happen on Monday. But what that means is we are going to have 2 days of a federal government shutdown. It will be a partial government shutdown before the House votes on this legislation on Monday.
Now, the president filed a lawsuit yesterday against the IRS and the Treasury Department in which he's seeking $10 billion in damages. John, you're a lawyer. What are the details of this suit, and what are the potential problems that this lawsuit could face?
Well, the details are this. A rogue individual who is a contractor at the IRS released details of Donald Trump's tax returns to the New York Times, which published them. And so the president is suing over that particular issue. $10 billion, that represents the president's punitive damages, they say, associated with the embarrassment of having this information released to the public. The problems, well, it could fall past the statute of limitations, number one, because the publication of this happened more than 2 years ago, which would be the statute of limitations. That's problem number one. And problem number two, there are so many conflicts associated with this. As it relates to the major conflict, the president is suing his own Treasury Department. The president is suing his own IRS. So that, too, is a major conflict that will have to be resolved by the federal courts.
All right, and finally, the Department of Justice today released more than 3 million additional pages from the Epstein files. John, what information is contained in this latest release?
Well, we know that it's actually 3.5 million pages altogether, 3.5 million documents, images that total around 180,000, and a lot of videos, 2,000 videos as well. There are many redactions here to protect the victims associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And that 3.5 million document release occurring today, that isn't even the tip of the iceberg. There's still 3 million more documents that need to be released by the Department of Justice. It obviously will take time to go through all of this material over the course of the next few weeks.
All right, White House correspondent John Decker, thanks for the good reporting.
Thank you.
And they were just speaking a few minutes ago about the Federal Reserve and that they did decide earlier this week to not drop interest rates once again. I wanted to know more about this, what they do. I sat down with Al Biss with Biss Wealth Partners to kind of have a conversation about what the Federal Reserve is and how it impacts our lives. Welcome to this edition of In Depth Alaska. I'm Tracy Sinclair, and with me today, Al Biss, our favorite certified financial planner with Biss Wealth Partners. And this has been in the news a lot lately, and so I thought I'd go to you because it feels like something I should know, and I don't really think that I do. Let's talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve, kind of Federal Reserve 101. 5 years ago, if you'd asked me who was the head of the Federal Reserve, I'd have been like, I don't know. But now I know his name, Jerome Powell, because they've been in the news.
Yes.
What is the Federal Reserve? What does it do?
Okay, first a little history on the Federal Reserve. For many years, the United States did not have a Federal Reserve. Then, 1907, there was a panic. Some of the bankers got together to kind of get everything put back together. And the U.S. government decided it's probably best not to depend on the banking to get through different crises. So they came up in 1913 with the Federal Reserve. Now, it's set up so it's not completely controlled by one area or another. It's based out of Washington, D.C., but there are 12 governors spread around the nation, so you're supposed to not have any one area or group, banks, feds, anything, controlling it.
Okay.
So to do this, their big mandate is controlling short-term interest rates, what the federal government loans money to banks, to kind of set that baseline interest rate. Where this comes in is they've got two goals. There are two mandates, and they're not always working together.
Okay.
The first mandate is maximum employment. That is trying to get as many people in the workforce as possible so we have as few people not working.
Okay.
So that's the first mandate. The second mandate is price stability, so not having inflation, which, for years you talk inflation, no one really got it. The last 5 years, people have understood a lot more because we've actually seen some. So the Federal Reserve is trying to do two things that conflict sometimes. So inflation is usually caused, you'll see it worse with low interest rates. It can push inflation up, but it helps the economy, so it lowers your unemployment. So it can fight against each other. So the Fed's kind of walking a tightrope with that sometimes.
It never occurred to me that the Federal Reserve was related to getting as many people employed there. So lowering what happens when you lower the interest rate? How does that get people employed?
Great question. So what that does is it encourages people to borrow money. It makes it less expensive to borrow money. So if I'm a company and I want to grow, if interest rates are higher, it's harder or more expensive for me to borrow money, which makes it less profitable to maybe do an expansion. If it's much less expensive to borrow money, then I'm more willing to go out there, borrow money to expand my business, maybe build a new factory, maybe bring on a whole new group of people to run a whole new division. If it costs me 15% to borrow the money, I'll be a lot more hesitant than if it would cost me 5% to borrow the money. So as interest rates drop, it's more attractive for folks to borrow money to then go out there and grow businesses or spend money or buy BTS tickets or whatever is out there that you're looking to do. Less expensive money makes it easier to do that.
So for businesses, yes, but this would kind of be the same thing, like I need to remodel my bathroom. I'm going to borrow some money to do that. Again, if it's a lower interest rate, I'm going to say, okay, it's worth it to do it now.
Absolutely. If I look out there and say, okay, I'm going to borrow $100,000 for a home improvement project, it's at 5%, it's $5,000 a year, $400 a month of interest. Not great, but if it's at 15%, there's $15,000 a year of interest I'm having to pay. That'll make me think twice about doing that bathroom remodel. Or buying a car if my interest rate's 8% versus 2%. Or if I'm buying a house, if I'm getting interest on a mortgage at 3 or 4%, I can afford a lot more house. I'm willing to pay more for a house than if it's at 7 or 8%. So as interest rates are lower, it allows people to borrow more, to spend more, both individually and on the business side.
So just recently, the Federal Reserve, just on Wednesday, decided we're not changing anything.
Right.
The president wanted the interest rate to be lowered.
Right.
Why would you not want the interest rates to be lowered? Why is there conflict there?
Great question, and that also leads me to the second mandate of the Fed, price stability. So, as Milton Friedman said, I've got the quote here, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Inflation is too many dollars, or not necessarily too many dollars, but many dollars chasing a limited supply of goods. So if we run interest rates really low, all these people have all this money they're spending, they're out there spending money, prices go up. We saw this last 4 or 5 years when they kept interest rates low, arguably too long, and there was a bunch of stimulus that was dumped on the market. So there's all these people with all this money out there spending, and we're seeing prices that rose up. So you're seeing everything from houses to all, a bunch of things going. You couldn't find vehicles. It was hard to buy cars. There was somewhat supply chain, but there was a lot of demand. Supply didn't change. Prices go up.
Okay.
Now, we mentioned a little earlier, demand pricing. What are your experiences with that?
Dynamic pricing, trying to get BTS tickets.
Yes.
Prices change while you're looking at it.
Yep. So just like anything with a limited supply, if you've got a huge amount of demand, we'll try and charge 10 grand for this ticket. Okay, no one's buying it at 10. How about 8? 6? Oh, there's a whole bunch of people at 6. Let's bump it to 7. Same thing, we're familiar with it here in Alaska when we're looking at trying to travel out of state during any school holidays. Alaska Airlines knows they've got us. All the airlines raise their prices because there's a huge demand, X amount of supply, so you see prices go up. So when it comes to the Federal Reserve, if they keep interest rates too low too long, all that money comes in the system, it pushes prices up, and then we get inflation. So they're walking a line of trying to keep the interest rates low enough to keep the economy going well and their unemployment low, employment high, but not so low that it stimulates too much and we start to raise prices and get inflation again. So one of the former Fed chairmen, Alan Greenspan, had a saying, is the Federal Reserve's job is to take the punch bowl away just as the party's getting going, which when you're a politician, you want that stimulus, you want the fast economy. Even if farther down the road prices go up, you want the stimulus now, you want the low interest rates now to get things looking better and better on your watch. Farther down the road, not as big of a concern. So that's what we're seeing politicians of all stripes want, to cut rates so they can encourage the economy to do better under their watch.
But then the Federal Reserve is also watching that inflation side of it and saying, in 18 months, this will have been a bad decision.
Yeah, well, and this is the problem. It is an 18-month lag, 6, 12, 18. It's farther down the road. It's kind of like driving down Minnesota in one of these snowstorms. There's a semi in front of you. You hope everything keeps going the same and you don't see any brake lights all of a sudden. So they have to try and figure out what's going on in the future by using past data. So it is a bit of a guessing game. It's walking a tightrope between those two mandates of low unemployment and prices that aren't increasing too fast. So yes, that's a continuing thing where what they're trying to find, which is kind of one of these economic concepts called the neutral rate, which is the interest rate they can set at where it's that kind of Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, unemployment's low, inflation's low, everyone's happy. No one knows where that number is, though. So you'll have some experts saying, well, they should cut rates, another half, 3/4, 1%. Professor Siegel from Wharton is one that's saying he's been saying you can cut rates for a while. Other people come out saying, cut rates too much, inflation pops back up, that's harder to put back in the bag. And once inflation goes up, you usually don't see it come down. It's a one-way ratchet.
And so just kind of my last question, as your average person,
yeah,
how does this impact my life?
Great question. Depends on what you're doing. Are you loaning money out or borrowing money? Now, most folks, especially when you're younger, you're borrowing money. You're buying a house, you're buying a car, you're taking loans on to buy these items. The interest rates going up slows that down, it makes it more expensive. So rising interest rates is harder on people borrowing money. Lowering interest rates are better on people that are borrowing money. On the flip side, are you loaning money? And most folks say, well, how do I loan money? I don't loan money.
Right. I don't loan money to anybody.
There's a few folks out there. And you're attached to things that loan money. So if you're at the bank in your savings account, if interest rates are low, you're not making much on it. If you get a short-term CD, that's loaning money to the bank. So as interest rates go up, you're making more interest. Now in your 401ks at work, or if you've got a pension plan, they're in there investing in bonds. As interest rates go up, you make more money on bonds, CDs, savings. So it's rising rates are good for people loaning out money, not as good for people borrowing money. So lowering rates hurts some people, helps others. Just like everything, there's a trade-off. There's pros and cons to everything.
Well, your favorite answer every time we ask a question is,
it depends.
It depends.
I know. I'm pretty predictable.
So very good. Thanks. Al Biss with Biss Wealth Partners. Thank you so much for joining us on In Depth Alaska. That was really interesting, and I think I understand the Federal Reserve a little bit better.
Thank you.
It was a really fun conversation, and I do feel like I learned some stuff, so I really appreciate Al coming in and talking to us.